So last night I finished off fitting the 16 amp connection. I've got all the sockets in place now, but I've screwed up. I can't believe I've done this. I've put on all the connectors that I was thinking about and completely forgot the data connection. The Bob uses parallel port as its native driver. It can also use an Ethernet connection with a smooth stepper attachment, but I'm going to try Linux CNC initially, so I need a 25 pin or 36 pin parallel port connection. And as you can see, I've built the board, and certainly over this side, which is where the Bob is, there's not really space for a connection. So that is a major cock up on my part. Now I might, if I'm very lucky, just about be able to rescue this. So over here, where the fan is, it fills that sort of area. About that. And so the edge of the fan casing is about here, and then the edge of the case is here. So I've got 20mm or so to play with there, ish. Certainly not a lot of space. I mean, fortunately, the parallel port connection is fairly small, so I think I can probably make it fit in. What I'm thinking is, because although I'm planning on using a Linux CNC initially, I seriously suspect I'm going to end up using Mac 4 and a smooth stepper, so I need to leave myself space for both a parallel port and an Ethernet port, which gives me the choice then of which one I use. If I'd been thinking about it, I'd have put these a little bit closer together and probably put it here, but that's what happens when you don't plan it out. Anyway, that left me with a problem. I need a parallel port connection, so I can go and buy one, certainly from a company like RS or something. They'll sell me one. They're not very expensive, they're a couple of quid, and shipping is something ridiculous like 10 quid. I don't really want to pay 10 or 11 pounds for something that costs £2, so I went and had a rummage around in my bits box, because I've been into computers since forever, and I think I've kept just about every piece of computing equipment that I've ever had. So I went to have a little look around, see what I've got in stock, as it were. And the first thing I came up with was this, which is a 25 pin cable, 25 pin round cable, quite nice. Only problem with this is the computer is female, and one end of this is female as well, so that's not the end of the world. Well, not a perfect match though, because ideally I want a 25 pin on the case as well, and the most likely connector I can find for that is probably going to be a male. So I dug through a bit more and I found this one, which is pretty good. It's got a male on this end, so we'll match the computer, and it's got a 36 pin Amphenol connector. Now that's what a printer normally uses, but I don't have a printer to steal the port from, so I can't really use that. what I need is the connector for the case, and what I did find was an old motherboard. Now I don't know what computer this was from. I'm not sure I think somebody gave me this. That was for the processor, and I seem to remember that was a really rather good processor in its day. It was Pentium Pro or something like that. The processor's long gone. It's a piece of wood on it. As you can see, it's very dusty. It's been in storage forever. But what it does have is a 25-pin parallel port. Now I can probably at a push get that off the board. It will wreck the board, but what do I care? Yeah, alright, probably can just about mount that. Let's see if we've got something better. So I did some more digging. Found a 25-pin cable. Could come in useful. Now I thought that looks quite good, because if I could mount that, then I could use that round cable I found. And that would plug straight into the bob. But I reckon more digging. I found this. We're getting closer now. So 25-pin male, pre-mounted. Only trouble is, it's got a weird cable on it. So that's only, what's that, 10 pins? So God only knows what that cable's for. It looks like it's got a serial port, so for the life of me, I do not know what that was for. It looks like a printer port, it smells like a printer port, but it's not any normal printer port. It's a bit more digging. Came up with another cable with an Amphenol connector on. Not enormously useful. And then finally, jackpot. There we go, 25 pin with full-size ribbon cable. Regular connector on that end, goes straight into the bob. Absolutely spot on. And if I undo these retaining nuts, then that will just pop out of there, and I can mount that straight into the cover. So absolute win there. That saved me some money. I also, on my travels, came across this. So male to male, which is exactly what I want, because it's going to be it's going to be female on the computer and female on the case. Nice round, flexible round cable. Yeah, perfect. And I've already off camera checked this, and it's exactly as you'd expect, straight through cable. And there's continuity on all the pins, so I think that is going to be absolutely spot on. That's the only one of those I've got though, so got to treat that carefully. In my box of bits I also found this, which is a standard fan holder. I don't need it at the moment because I'm just going to bolt my fans straight to the case, but if I need to put another fan at the top, then that could come in really handy. And I found this, which is a old school trackball. It's got a PS2 connector on it, which, yeah, is not terribly useful on a modern computer, but on the computer I'll be using for the CNC machine it's fine. And a trackball, I much prefer a trackball to a mouse for a computer like this. Basically you don't have the mouse grinding away on all the little crud that forms around a computer that's used in a rough environment. A trackball is a much simpler way of handling it. And actually I quite like them. I know you probably can't even buy trackballs anymore. I got this when I developed a bit of RSI. And yeah, I really got used to it. I quite like them. So anyway, a little bit of success this morning. It's time to get on and try and fix my mounting panel. So I mounted the connector panel back in to the case so that I could trace out the outline of the inside of the case to see where I can mount things. And yeah, I'm starting to be a bit hopeful that this isn't a complete disaster. What I need to do now though is just quickly find the limit of this cover, because that determines where I can fit things. And of course this cover clips over, so that gives me that. So yeah, I've got a reasonable amount of space there. Not as much as I would have liked, considering I had quite a lot of space to play with. So that gives me, it's about 26mm by 105. Now I'll just whip this out here. Right, so that comes out of there really easily. That's just a 1mm blanking plate. Don't know what they are. They look to be about M3 sort of size. Now, one thing I do remember reading, or at least I think I remember reading, is this has to be electrically isolated from the case, because the bob has a separate earth. Well, this uses the earth of the computer, which isn't necessarily the same as the earth of the case, so you can end up with ground loops. So they recommend mounting it in a piece of plastic, but I really don't think I'm going to have space in there to mount a piece of plastic. So I think what I'm going to have to do is somehow make some plastic covers to keep that isolated. That's going to be tight though, because when these two go together, there isn't an enormous amount of space around there. I think what I'm going to have to do, oops, I think what I might have to do is sacrifice the screwing on there. I wonder if I can get some longer, because these are just like standoffs. So if I could get some really long standoffs, I could probably mount it with the back in, which would mean it would be sitting on the plastic rather than on the metal. So not like that, more like that. And then I could bolt onto the bottom of the standoff. Now the standoff will go through there, come out here. There's already bolts in there. I'd have to get the bolts out of there. But that would work, that would make it electrically isolated. And it would mean a fairly small hole through for there. In fact, about the same sort of hole that we need anyway. Looking at it, because you'd need these little wings cut in. Yeah, I think that's going to work, if I can find some long enough standoffs. So I just looked at this connector again, and I hadn't noticed before, but there's a step here. So I don't actually have to make this hole quite as big as I expected. In fact, I think it would be better if I didn't. That way I can always, if I eventually end up mounting this in like this as it normally is, then I can just widen the hole. Whereas if I made it big enough so that it sat flush on here, then it would actually be too large, because of course this plastic's the size of that. It will mean though, we'll have a slight gap between there, 1.5 mil, 2 mil maybe. But this is surprisingly stiff, so you know, I don't think that gap will cause me a problem. So I need to mount this in here. I want it vaguely square, so I'll get this out. Now I want it if anything, I want to err towards the outer edge because this screw does protrude slightly, but certainly not enough to interfere with the connector. But this, the fan case protrudes quite a lot. Now that could interfere, so erring on the side of caution, I'm going to place it about there, I think. And we want to get this nicely down here to give us as much space at this end as possible in the future. There we go. So I've kept the mounting screws, which will be here going through that way. Kept them away from the bottom, so there'll definitely be space there and there. This is far enough away from that edge that this lip won't interfere, and it's far enough from there that that won't interfere. On the other side, this will be sticking out, so there'll be ample space around this for that to fit in there. There's a good 5 or 6 mil, and in the future when I come to fit an Ethernet port, there should be space here for that. So now what I'm going to do is drill here, drill at let's say 3 mil probably for each screw. I'll widen out, I'll open up the hole a little bit with a file, and I'll just take out some of the bulk here, and I'll clean that up with a file as well. That was close. Nearly lost all the footage there because the camera only had 100 megs left on it. So now I've drilled a couple of holes for the screws and done a bit of chain drilling there, so I'm just going to use a file here to connect the holes together, and then I'll use a slightly larger file to get it out to the actual size I need. Yeah, I've discovered something. You don't want, if you use new pillar drill on a really low speed, I set it to a really low speed to cut the hole for the 16 amp, and I haven't upped the speed again, but there's a real temptation because everything cuts more slowly, to really pull down on the drill bit, give it some decent pressure, make it cut a bit faster. The problem with that is, with small drill bits, they shatter, and I am so glad I'm wearing my safety specs, because I've just had a drill bit explode in my face, and there were little fragments of sharp hardened steel flying all over the workshop. Not something I want to repeat, so I'm going to up the speed again so I can drill holes at a reasonable rate and not pull down on the drill too hard. Anyway, time to just file these into shape. So I'm merrily filing away on the panel, and I realise this is a metal outer case. I'm about to use metal screws through a metal connector panel, which is earthed, a different earth potentially to the computer. So yeah, I've basically bypassed my plastic standoff, which isn't exactly great, but that gets me thinking. This outer case, surely that's not going to be earthed to the PC ground, is it? Now I'll read the section from the PNDX manual. The PC ground terminals on junctions 1 through 7 are connected to the ground of the host computer or pulse generator, such as smooth stepper, through the parallel port cable inside. Inside the computer, this ground is connected to the safety ground of the power cord. For pulse generators, this ground may or may not be connected to a PC depending on the pulse generator. In order to avoid ground loops, you should not connect PC ground to any frame or safety ground in the machine control box. Fair enough, that makes sense. They are potentially different grounds and there could be loops in them. The metal shell of the parallel port cable should not make contact with the metal wall of the control enclosure, because this would also short PC ground to the frame ground of the control enclosure. The mounting screws for the DB25 connector will also short to PC ground to the enclosure. The best way to avoid this problem is plug the parallel port DB25 directly into the DB25 connector at junction 15 on the PMDX, or mount any intermediate DB25 connectors on a plastic sub-panel. Right, now that makes perfect sense, and yeah, it would result in electrical isolation, but what doesn't make sense is why this outer metal enclosure would be this PC ground. If you look at the inside of this, you have lots of pins running into the cable, but none of them connect to the outer case. So here's a demonstration of the problem. I've got the hole big enough now to, so it rests on the plastic case, and as you can see, I've got a continuity across there. I mean, as luck would have it, before I put this standoff in, I didn't actually have continuity. That one's not touching the case, but this one is, and I mean, it's not even properly torqued down yet, so yeah, I would definitely end up with continuity there. So I have had a thought though about a possible solution, is go back to using the original connectors for this and just gluing it into place, because these would have been a fiddle to make anyway, and it's not like this is getting very heavy usage. That's actually quite a tight connection. I mean, that's literally just pushed in there, and it's, you know, there you go. So it's pretty tight, and with bead hot melt glue there and on the other side, I actually don't think that would come out anyway. The only downside is that will pull out of there. Ah, no, it won't. Once the standoffs are in, because there's tiny nuts that go in the back of here. And once they are in place, that will hold this front case on using the connector, and then glue will probably bite quite nicely onto that. I actually think that might work. So I've screwed the connectors back in to the DB25, and yeah, there's loads of space between the bottom of the screw and the cover. And now I'm just going to run a little bead of hot melt glue along both edges. I honestly don't know if that will be enough to hold it, but I think it's worth a shot, because if that... Just unplug the glue gun. If that does hold it, that's a very, very quick and simple solution to the problem. So the glue's cooled enough now to touch. I decided to run a second bead along. Thought might as well, as glue's cheap and it would be better to have too much than too little. So will that come out? No, that is in there. That is in there proper tight, actually. I think if I really, really forced it, I probably could get that out. But to be honest, I think I would probably be cutting that out. So, well, is it pretty? No, it's not at all pretty. Does it work? Yes, it does. I'm not proud of it, but this DB25 connector has been a cock up from the start, so that's a reasonable outcome, I think. So, yeah, I'm happy that that's not going anywhere. We'll just, the real proof, I suppose, is to connect this and pull it out, and if the connector comes with it, then we'll know it's... No, didn't even budge. I don't think that's ever coming out of there. I suppose if I was getting a bit paranoid, I can run beads of glue along both sides there as well. It wouldn't provide as much support though, because obviously you're ripping the glue off. No, I'm pretty pleased with that. Final test, of course, if I can find the multimeter. Where's the multimeter gone? I've lost the multimeter. Oh, there it is. It's going blind. Of course, the last test is to find out if we've got isolation, which yes, we have isolation. So there we go. That's the parallel port connected. So it's gone from a disaster to not bad, which I'll live with that. Here's a quick explanation for why this metal outer casing mustn't be connected to the casing of your control box. And it's because this outer casing and these connecting studs are at PC ground, not case ground. And if this is mounted directly onto the case, then there's a danger of a ground loop. Now if you remember, I said that the outer case of the socket isn't connected to the PC ground pins. And that's correct, it isn't connected to the pins, but that doesn't mean it isn't at PC ground. And the reason it's at PC ground is because these connectors have continuity across their cases. And this end is connected to the chassis of the computer, and the chassis of the computer is at PC ground. So that means that the outer case of that socket is at PC ground, and so it must not be connected to the control case ground. Yeah, because certainly in the case of this control case, there's a good danger or there's a risk of a ground loop, because this is on a 16 amp supply, so that supply is probably going to go straight back to the fuse box, whereas the PC is going to be plugged into an ordinary socket. And now the ordinary socket will almost certainly go back to the same fuse box, but it's going there in a roundabout way, so there's a lot of scope for induced currents. So there you go. That's why it must be isolated.